without limits or judgment. A place for you and people like you to tell your most effed up stories.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharpe.
And tonight we are dedicating this episode to our family pets. I am dedicating it to my family cat, Lloyd Pender, who passed away on June 17th, 2014. I was actually planning on doing this episode since then. It's not that I haven't gotten around to it. I just wanted to have the right content for the show. And, it took a little while to, decide how I wanted to do it. And Ryan wants to dedicate it to his cat. So, Ryan.
In July, middle of July, my little cat Hades got out through, he managed to open a screen in a window. And got out, and he's been missing ever since. And while I hold up every hope that I'm going to see him again, I dedicate my half or my portion of the show, or dedicate the show to him and his memory in the event that he doesn't return. So I guess with that, Will.
Basically, the idea is not just that we're dedicating to our cats, but this episode is actually, if you're a pet lover, if you have an animal, or you're an animal lover, and you've had pets that died, this episode is all about animals and the paranormal, and it also has a focal point on the topic of do animals have souls? Something that I would imagine, and many of us animals lovers have thought, especially as we've had our pets pass on. And so that's something we're going to discuss tonight. So if you're an animal lover like I am, tonight's episode is for you. But before we jump into that, in our last episode, we asked you guys to listen to our playlist while you were sleeping, hoping that certain keywords would trigger strange dreams or help you remember, some forgotten events or things that you may have repressed. Such as being abducted or something along those lines. And, if you had remembered or recalled one of these events while doing so, to let us go, and we would, come back in a month and hopefully do a show on it. Well, a month is up and so far no stories. So I don't know if you guys have tried it and got no results or just didn't do it. But we are still interested to see if it works. So, feel free to keep at it. And if you do happen to recall anything during this process, we ask that you get in contact and let us know what it is. And of course, if you have any effed up stories of your own, pictures or videos, on the paranormal, please submit that to us at effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com for a chance to get it on the website and or in a podcast. And with that having been said, let's kick off tonight's episode with a few stories of animals and the paranormal. So, one of the first things I want to start with, it's centered around animals, dogs in dogs particularly. But I don't know if it's a dog thing or a place thing, but we'll get into that. So, of course, what I'm talking about is the dog suicide bridge, which is, the actual official name of the bridge is Overtown Bridge, or
Overton.
Overton Bridge. It's an arch bridge in Scotland, which has become known because a lot of these dogs have actually leapt off of it, killing themselves. It's the bridge of dog suicides. Not only did this happen enough to become well known, which is already strange, but some dogs would leap off of this thing, live, and come back up the hill only to jump off of it again. So this happened enough that they actually have a name for that too. They call it second timers. So I mean, this is really bizarre. So there's a few different theories as to why this happens. Some say the bridge is haunted thanks to a guy that threw his child over the side, claiming it was the Antichrist. Some suicides had happened there, and there's some Celtics that believe that, the barrier between the world of the living and the world of the dead is thin there, and that dogs are more susceptible to the paranormal than humans and can sense something that we can't. Perhaps it's communicating with something, and goes and does this leap of faith thing.
And I think it's important to note that even more bizarre is the fact that almost always they jump off of the right side of the bridge between two specific parapets. The bridge has several parapets, marking off, quarter points along the bridge or something like that. And they always, the final two parapets on the right-hand side is that particular spot. So it's not just that particular bridge, but a particular spot on that particular bridge, which I found even more curious,
Well, and there's a skeptical, more rational explanation that, have been thrown around, and that the idea is that there's a population of minks under the bridge in the shrubs. The dogs smell it and jump blindly off the bridge, toward the smell, not realizing how big the drop is. But that being the case, though, I would find it especially strange to explain that, within regards to the second timers. They already jumped off the bridge. They already know it's dangerous. Why they would come back up and do it again.
And why in that spot? I mean, if you look at the picture, the whole under area of the bridge is filled with vegetation. And sure, if there's a population of minks or whatever down there, why in that particular, is there a special updraft that carries the smell up? I don't know. That seems like it seems like it's reaching a bit,
Yeah, well, like one of the thoughts that I had is that why just this bridge? Certainly people take their dogs everywhere. Hiking trails, all different kinds of nature trails and stuff like that in the woods where there are all kinds of different animals and hazardous cliffs and things like that. So why is it so common on this bridge and nowhere else that we've heard of?
Now, one thing, because the guy who threw his baby off the bridge, threw his son over off of that bridge, and then I think he tried to kill himself later in the same spot. That was only in 1994. I say only, but it's not that long ago. But I couldn't find any correlation between whether that the phenomenon started shortly after that, or if it's something that's been going on there, even before that.
I couldn't find a correlation either, but I do find it, again, if you're being centric on the idea that it's just animals, in this case specifically dogs, that's strange to me. There's something, that communicates something to the dogs that it doesn't seem to reach other people. I know there has been suicides on the bridge, but obviously not like as many dogs that have leapt off of this thing.
Yeah, not even close.
So it's a really dog centric problem, and I can't I'm kind of baffled by it. And it's interesting, but again, it's a case of animals and the paranormal. What is it about, why does this affect dogs and seemingly nothing else?
Yeah, it's so particular.
It is.
And I guess, I guess if we're going to make an argument for the paranormal, obviously there's, well, I say obviously, but perhaps it's, a malevolent dog hating spirit,
Well, yeah, and there has been, I mean, there's all kinds of different spirits that are associated with different, animals. That that's something in that you see in third world cultures a lot. Is they have all these different gods that are deities of, related to different animals and stuff like that. And who knows, right? I mean, maybe there is a connection there somehow. But that's just one of these little stories, and this one's dog centric. And basically, what I want to do is tell a couple different stories that involve animals, and that ties them to the paranormal, and then of course tie this into the whole soul aspect. So the next little story that I have has to do with seemingly a psychic cat. So I came across this story of this woman. She had this cat named Patches, and they lived in Baltimore City. And she also had a neighbor, like, some way down the road. And, this neighbor, this woman, it's her neighbor's cat down the road that used to come visit her all the time, right? And so this woman, I mean, she had a dog. I'm not sure if she had a cat, but she did keep, like, whiskas and milk on hand. And so this, neighbor's cat would come visit, and she would feed it whiskas, she would feed it milk and stuff like that, like pretty regularly, right? And so anyway, one of these nights, this cat came, but it was out of character. It wasn't interested in food, it wasn't interested in milk.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the Patches tale, correct?
Yes. So okay, so you read this one too. So, on this particular night, the cat was meowing with distress in its voice. And if any of you people have cats, like I can tell you, having grown up with cats, and I have a cat now, that I can tell, what kind of, I guess how serious of a call it is from my cat, depending on the tone in his meow.
They have different calls for different things. Like I know that when Hades went missing, his brother. I have two cats, and they are half brothers, and his big brother would walked around the house for weeks making his "Where are you?" noise. Right, when they didn't know where one another was, they had a specific a call that they would make. And I mean, I've had them for over 6 years, and it's something that you learn to recognize. So anybody who's familiar with cats, I'm sure would tell you the same thing.
Yeah, they have a lot of different tonal variations, and you can kind of, they can't communicate with words, but they can communicate, I guess, the seriousness of what they're dealing with. So in this case, the cat was meowing, and it was in obvious, it was an obvious distressing kind of a mew. And it was acting as if it wanted to communicate something with this woman. It would kind of just dance around, skirt around. It wouldn't eat. It was like it wanted her to follow it. And so, the woman, began to wonder if, there was something in the alley that was scaring it or whatever. But eventually she just, she got up, she took the cat back to its owners, who were, her owners were named Sandy and Mike. That's the neighbors. Now, this was 12:30 in the morning, so... a point of her story was, how uncomfortable, I guess, that was. I know that I would feel uncomfortable going to my neighbors at 12:30 in the morning, especially about their cat.
Yeah, because I believe the cat actually, it basically led her. It would go ahead so far and then look back and, mew at her, and it would sit and it would wait. And when she got close to it, it would run ahead some more until it got to its front door, and it put its paws up on the door, and she was standing there looking at this cat, thinking, what is she going to do? Knock on the door 12:30 and say, "Hey, your cat's making funny sounds."
Yeah, and hope that they don't come to the door with a gun or a baseball bat, which is kind of understandable, especially in a bigger city that has a big high crime rate. But nevertheless, that's what she did. She went to the neighbor's house. It was 12:30 in the morning. And she knocks on the door, and she wakes up the sleeping husband, Mike. Right? I mean, he's asleep on the couch, and she explains to him that the cat was meowing really loudly, at her house and stuff like that. And oddly enough, he was kind of understanding about it, if not, a little groggy. And he took the cat in, and he went upstairs to go to sleep. And so, that's kind of what, that was that kind of a thing. She went home, she told her husband was like, "What the hell were you thinking?" Blah, blah, blah. But the next day, the woman runs into, she goes out to take her dog for a walk, and she runs into the neighbor's wife, Sandy. And, she's expecting it to almost be like verbally blasted for this late night wake up call, and I can kind of understand that. But that's not what happened. Instead, Sandy was extremely grateful that the woman had woken up her husband, Mike. And, the woman was kind of taken aback. And, as she explained it, Mike was asleep on the couch at the time. And, after she'd woken him up, he went back upstairs to bed. But sometime after he had been woken up, a gunshot had went through the window and hit the couch where he would have been sleeping, which, could very well have killed him. So it's almost as if this cat knew what was going to happen before it happened, and he did what he could to save its owner, right? I mean, so that would be psychic. It would be a premonition that the cat would have had. And I mean, this is, there's many different examples, but this is one of the ones that I took to tell. But I mean, you can.
Yeah, there's kind of an animal phenomenon, I mean, when we were talking about this originally, I did want to go and get particular bits and pieces about cats and dogs, and but I came across, the phenomenon of what's known as, entombed animals, or toad in the toad in a hole phenomenon. And I mean, it's strange. The basics of it is that every once in a while people stumble across a rock and break it open, only to have a living toad. Most of the times it's a toad, sometimes it's another type of reptile. And this has even happened with, like the trunk of a tree was split open. And I mean, it was solid, and embedded in the trunk of the tree were these little yellow frogs. And they were in these little pockets that were perfect, almost perfect molds, basically, just enough room for them to be in there without being crushed. And there was no burrow holes. There was no mode of entrance and egress. And it's interesting that even there's even reports of this by Benjamin Franklin. So I mean, that's a pretty high profile, well-known historical individual, and you have this person reporting that I do believe it was they broke open a rock. And inside was a frog, and excuse me. Sometimes they're dead, but a lot of the times they're found. It takes like a moment or two, and they kind of spring to life and hop out and jump away in some cases, or sometimes they're captured. But usually they're slightly different in their shapes and their form. Usually their coloration is off, and a lot of the times they're much bigger than, they may resemble a local species, but they're like remarkably bigger than normal for that particular species. And then, I found this this report from, I think it's like 1856. And it's a story of these miners who are, I think the quote goes something like, "The workmen were digging a railway tunnel through a layer of Jurassic limestone. They were startled to find a large creature stumbling out of a recently split boulder, flapping what looked like wings and croaking. It died immediately. The creature was identified as a pterodactyl by the local paleontology student who recognized the characteristic features of the extinct reptile. The stone in which it was found was consistent with the time period in which a pterodactyl lived and formed an exact mold of the creature's body. So, here you have a case of a dinosaur.
Well, I mean, the real question is it almost would seem that would have to have been, the rock or the tree would have had to have formed around it, which would have taken like a ridiculous amount of time.
Well, limestone can take anywhere from a couple of hundred to a couple of thousand years to form. So, I mean, even on the lower end of the scale, you're looking at a couple of hundred years of what can only be. And there was a researcher or scientist who, and it was a ways back. He actually made these. I think they were limestone slabs, and he made these little divots in them, just big enough for a dozen frogs, and he sealed them in these slabs. It's kind of grisly. Seal them in these slabs that were literally just enough room for them to be in, and buried it for a year. And then a year later, he dug them up, and half of them were still alive. And so he buried it again for another year, and this time they were all dead.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty amazing that they lived the first year, some of them. But it almost sounds like the rock or the tree trunk almost acts as an embryo of sorts for the creature inside, but can keep it in stasis, or stasis.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of different toads and reptiles do have the ability, especially a lot of toads have the ability to burrow into the mud of an evaporating lake, or a evaporating pond, and they go into a state of suspended animation, and sometimes it's a year later or so. And when the rains come back and the pond reforms and they burrow back out of the mud and come to life. Now, that's a little different than finding something in solid rock, but it, really begs the question if some of these species could live for hundreds of years, right, in the dried lake bed or pond that just never hasn't seen rain in a couple of hundred years, and then it was sealed in a perfect environment with no perhaps there's no bacteria inside. How long could it remain in that state? It's just it borders on the incredible, really.
Oh, it does. I mean, actually, one of the first things I thought of when you were saying that was it reminded me of the Philadelphia experiment where people were embedded into the ship after it came back. But, in this case, there was no experiment. I don't know. It's baffling. I mean, there's just really no way to articulate just how strange that it is. However, it does, for the next story that I want to tell, it kind of brings back the focal point on it's going to lead into the animal soul thing, which I think is an interesting topic, especially for us animal lovers who have had pets die and pass on. We want to know, where they go. Can we meet up on the other side, kind of a thing. So some of you may have heard this story, actually, but it's interesting nonetheless. It's about a cat named Oscar, who was adopted and grew up on an end-stage dementia unit in Steers House Nursing and Rehabilitation Center located in Providence, Rhode Island. So, and I believe they had 6 different cats, but this particular cat, Oscar, was different. After a while, the staff started to notice that Oscar would go around sniffing and observing the patients, and he would stay and cuddle up with certain ones. And what they noticed was that the ones that they stayed and cuddled up with, they would die that night during he would usually come during the last 2 hours of that patient's life, and after the patient would die, he would slowly and quietly just leave the room. So he began to have like unusual success. He was like 100% pretty much for the most part 100% accurate. And so there was an article written about him that was really put the spotlight on him out in mainstream media. But by the time that the article was written, Oscar had already accurately predicted more than 25 consecutive deaths. And an example given on Wikipedia just to showcase Oscar's skill was this doctor had determined this patient's death was imminent, right? And because Oscar wasn't there, the doctor was like, okay, I guess Oscar's streak is over. Kind of rationalize it. Yeah, he can't predict whatever. This patient's going to die and Oscar's not here. But apparently the prognosis was 10 hours too early because Oscar came to the room to stay with the patient again just 2 hours before he died. That's how accurate Oscar is. So as of January 20th, 2010, Oscar had actually predicted around 50 deaths. Now, there's some scientists that have rationalized it to say that, Oscar can smell certain chemicals that are released from the body when it's dying, or that he can pick up on the lack of body movement and sound and etc. But this, and this could very well be true, just as there are dogs that can smell cancer, there are dogs that can warn their owners before they have a seizure and other things. But on that same train of thought, we could probably say the same thing for any sixth sense. Humans who are able to see the future, premonitions. I'm sure that all of these things actually have a scientific reason behind it that we just haven't found yet. So it only seems magical to us because we don't understand how it works.
Well, I think the up and coming theory for that is that the process of organs shutting down puts off a particular odor, that there's a chemical change in the body when the organs begin to shut down, like wholesale system failure.
Yeah.
And that process produces certain types of chemicals and pheromones, because I'm not sure about cats. I know dogs have an organ that we don't. On top of having, we got like, what is it, like 5,000 or 6,000 receptors, and they have like 22,000 or smell receptors.
Yeah.
And they have a whole other olfactory organs. So I just, the dog and the cat both. It puts a new perspective on the Egyptians and their view of the cats as kind of like keepers of the dead. In this case, this guy very much was, he veritably ushered 50 or more people into the afterlife.
So, I mean, if you want to look at it, then, yes, there's always going to be a rational explanation if we can explain it. What makes a mystery interesting is that we can't explain it, and so it seems magical to us. But even if we look at it from a rational point of view, okay, well, then he can smell the chemicals that a dying body gives off. Okay, so that's the reason why, right? But there's a more, interesting aspect to take away from this, and that is the trait that we attribute with a trait that we attribute with the human soul, and that is empathy. That the cat shows empathy, that he actually goes to the room of a dying patient and spends those last couple hours with the patient so that they don't die alone.
Well, that's the important thing. Is it's not how he does it; it's why he does it.
Yes. So
it's he, right? Oscar's.
Yes. So like, to me, that brings back another example that reinforces the notion that animals have souls, because that is a trait. Like, the argument against the idea of having animals having souls is often that they're instinctual. It's just nature. They don't have the personality. They don't have the traits that make us human. That the souls that we have, why they're special. And I have some examples here of why I believe that that's false. And this is one example here. We have a cat showing empathy. So, the question, do animals have souls? Well, there has actually been physical studies on this question. Now originally this started with human souls, so I'll start with that. But there was a doctor by the name of Duncan McDougall who searched for physical evidence of the human soul, and he did this in like 1901. So he did this by creating a special weight scale. It was like an industrial scale, and he would set it under like the willing patients who were dying from tuberculosis. So this was like a tuberculosis ward, right? And the idea being that if the weight was different right after dying, because we believe that like when we die, the human soul leaves our body, leaves our vessel, right? So if the physical, if the soul had the physical property of a weight and it left our body and he could measure it, well, now he has physical evidence that, we have a soul and it has a weight. So that was the whole idea behind this project. So, he got permission to do this in this again, this tuberculosis ward, and he managed to perform the experiment on 6 willing patients. Now, he only got 4 successful measurements. And if you look online, I mean, you probably have heard, 21 grams. People say the human soul is 21 grams. And that's just a thrown around number. That was only actually one of the patient's weight. The reality is that each one of those patients that he was able to measure had a different weight for their soul. Like one was 21, one was 29, and so on. So this is probably something that you heard before, but this other part is not as well known, and that is that he tried to repeat the experiment with 15 dogs. Now, with the dogs, he couldn't detect any weight change whatsoever, which MacDougall took to mean that, only humans had souls. And there was another scientist that echoed that same statement after trying the same experiment with mice. So, but I ask, is it possible that animal souls just weigh less than a human soul? I mean, their bodies are smaller, so we have, physical properties there. And, so is it possible that the soul is, weighs less?
Well, I've often seen that in regards to giants. The idea that giants are multidimensional beings, and because they have a more powerful spirit, that as you go up in spirit power, you increase in size. Your body needs to contain your soul. It's perhaps it's some kind of rule.
Yeah, and that's something I want to get into here, but again, back to the MacDougall experiment, the device that he actually used to measure, the weight of the soul, I mean, we're talking 1900s? Perhaps it was just inadequate to measure that small a difference in weight shift, right? They say that, us humans are further along in evolution than animals. I mean, how far we are along in evolution translate, to a greater weight, for the complexity of our soul. Like, is it possible that the vessel that we have, the complexity of our vessel, is equally matched to the complexity of our soul, right? So I don't think that, we give animals enough credit. I mean, it's kind of shook off here. Animals don't have souls. And I mean, we see this in religion and, other various, doctrines as well. But let's look at some examples of animals who again show empathy and things like that much like us humans do, that, and again, this is a trait that we often relate to the soul and, the ability to make choices. So here are some examples of animals that have what I believe to be traits of a soul. So there was an African gray parrot, and he was very close with his owner. And right before he died, his last words to his owner was, "You be good, I love you." Right? Now, could those words have been coincidence? Because that sentence to me explains an understanding that he was dying, that he wanted to leave his owner with some loving parting words. It's along the same lines of something that us humans might say to our family on our deathbed. So does this not demonstrate, some kind of understanding? Again, he showed love for his owner. He showed, he wanted to leave these nice parting words to his owner. To me, it's not coincidence. It's too perfect a sentence, and that shows understanding to me.
Yeah, well, even if it was something that his owner said to him a lot, you be good now, I love you, which is something that I've said to my cats on numerous occasions. You boys be good, play nice now. Good night, love you.
Yeah.
And you end up talking to them like they're children. I'm talking, and Peyote's curled up on the that's my oldest cat, curled up asleep next to me, and every now and then he gives the little groan. The empathy, and I mean, I can tell you that when I'm sick, like they know they spend more time hanging out around. They always want to be up in my lap, and that's a great example right there. That this little guy, he knows that he's going, and even if he had heard that repeated to him 100 times, he used it. He used it in he knew he was going. It was the big sleep.
Exactly.
And he used it perfectly.
It was the understanding and choice of words, right? I mean, that to me says it's not an accident. And like your example, for me with Lloyd, in some of my darkest times, years and years and years ago, that is probably when I bonded with Lloyd the most, because I was in a really bad place. But Lloyd spent a lot of time comforting me. Like he'd hang out in my room with me while I was playing video games, or while I was sleeping, if I was out watching TV, late at night. There he was again, curled up next to me, and it's like he knew again that I was depressed or whatever, and there he was, right? And so all of you other pet owners out there may have noticed the same thing with your pets. It's almost like they have that sixth sense. They can sense when you're down, or whatever, if you're sick, and there they are. They're there comforting you. So if you're a pet owner, you kind of already own that. If you're not, again, these are some examples that are pretty extreme, like in the case of this bird, because it not just shows empathy, but again, understanding.
And then there's the story of like the surfer who gets attacked by a great white shark, and the thing literally has his legs stuffed into his mouth and has a big bite. He's got him sandwiched between his top jaw and his back, and the bottom jaw's on the surfboard, and half of his leg is kind of like sticking in his mouth. And out of nowhere, a small pod of bottlenose dolphins show up and just beat the hell out of the shark, and it leaves. And he said, at one point he looked, and they had formed like a protective wall between him and the shark as they were taking turns rushing it. And then a wave came out of nowhere, and he just kind of steered his board into it and went into shore and survived the attack. And I mean, if that doesn't show some kind of empathy, these weren't trained dolphins.
And intelligence. Intelligence, right?
They're considered the second most intelligent species on this planet. There is a convention that is, or an organization that is attempting to have them declared as non-human intelligences, non-human persons, and to have them declared that and have their rights protected as if they were people because of how intelligent they are.
Yes, and I've often heard, and I've actually seen quite a bit on dolphins as well. They are regarded.
They were dolphins. Sorry. Bottlenose dolphins.
Yes. So again, like that isn't a good example, but I mean, it goes from intelligent animals, to, and I'm not going to say dumb animals. I don't believe any animals are dumb, but less advanced. I mean, I read a story about a diver who had gotten stuck at the bottom of an Arctic pool, and her legs had cramped up, and she was sure she was going to die. She started to sink lower and lower, and then a beluga whale came out of nowhere, dove down, and actually carried her to the surface and saved her. How many stories have we heard of heroic dogs, like firefighter dogs who have saved their firefighter, or saved families? Or how many I've read of dogs who have saved children from other dogs, or dogs who have like gotten help for their dying owners who's had a heart attack or a stroke, or a seizure. I mean, there was one I watched on TV, like this, I Survived show, and this guy was lost in this, in the winter. His car had gotten stuck out in the middle of nowhere, and he was walking for days. He was diabetic, and his dog ended up going and getting help for him. It helped him survive in the night, cuddled up on top of him to keep him warm. But I mean, this extends even down to smaller animals like chimps and squirrels, who have shown, visual examples of mourning around the corpse of their friends. Like I've seen groups of chimps surrounded around, the one of their dead kin, or squirrels. I've seen a squirrel hanging around the dead body of one of his kin, and I've seen a dog who his friend had been hit by a truck on the road, and had actually gone over and pulled him off the road, and stayed by his side. I've seen stuff where a cop had died, and the dog wouldn't leave his grave. I mean, there's so many examples. I mean, there's stories like there was this, I believe it was a tiger. These two guys when they were younger, they had rescued this tiger from this. He was being sold. He was in this little cage. He was only a little cub, and they took him and they kept him until he got big enough that they couldn't take care of him anymore. And it was like 20 years later, they went out into the wild and called out to him in the way that they used to talk to him, which is scary, right? I mean, he's a grown up now. You're lucky if he doesn't eat you. But he actually came out.
Yeah, I believe it was actually two tigers, brothers.
Yeah, and either which way. I mean, he came over and he jumped up to do the hugs like he used to do. He brought out his wife. They didn't eat him. They actually showed affection and hung around and stuff. So they remembered him. And I've seen the same thing with a
gorilla.
Yeah,
there was another one with a gorilla, but he had raised it from a baby, and eventually, had it released to the wild. And I can't remember if it was how he ended up with it, like a rescue or something like that. And then, whatever it was, 10 years later or something, he shows up in the jungle, floating down the river, calling out to it, and here this full-grown gorilla comes down and picks pretty much hugs him and holds on to him and brings his whole family out and won't let him go.
Exactly. And I mean, these are great examples for animals and humans, but I mean, animals do it for animals too. Like I seen there was this bigger dog and this smaller dog, and the smaller dog was blind, and the bigger dog volunteered himself to be seeing eye dog for the smaller dog.
Let his friend around and
and there was these two elephants who had been together when they were young, and years and years and years and years later, after it had been separated for many, many years, they were brought back together, and they were in these cages, and they shook the cages and were putting their trunks up around and grabbing each other and causing such a ruckus to be together. And when they were, is they wouldn't let the people around them. It was they just stuck to one another like glue. It was they remembered each other, and they wanted to stay together, and they didn't want anyone to interfere, right? And they made lots of noise. They made lots of showed aggression to make that happen. So I mean, these are all kinds of emotions. And these emotions are what we would believe go hand in hand with having a soul. It's like having that choice. It's having
those complex, powerful connections to one another.
Yes, exactly. They're powerful and complex. That's emotions, and these are examples to me that would suggest that no, it's not just nature. It's not just instinctual. These are examples that they have a soul. They have a personality. They have a that special spark that we would call a soul, right? Is that special something. And of course, I looked at the origin of the word animal while I was researching this topic, and I came across an interesting note. The word animal is actually derived from the word anima, which is another word for soul. Now, and I've come across all kinds of religious stuff as well, and the Pope had said that animals do in fact have souls, or as he put it, that they have the breath of life, as does man. But there's theologians that say that there's a distinction between a human soul and an animal soul, And that is basically what they say is that, an animal soul is mortal, right? Like they have a soul, but once it dies, so does the soul. Whereas a human soul is eternal, and when we die, our soul goes beyond here, goes beyond earthly life. Now, there are several Bible passages that reference, animals going to heaven, but, different priests and theorists interpret all these things differently. So, I find in most religious circles, again, they might acknowledge that an animal has a soul, but they, again, believe there's a distinction and that it's not eternal for an animal, which is, I believe, I don't believe that's true. What I'm going to discuss now is, how I believe the soul works. And again, like, this is all speculation. That's all anyone can really do on this, but it's something that, is not like I just researched it for this topic. I've been reflecting on this for forever. Tons and tons of years of different sources that I've read, watched, and, just lots of reflection on what things mean. And here's what I think. So I found the same ideology of what, this distinction between souls on different sites. They basically say that the animal soul is matter and that ours is spiritual, and that's different. Theirs dies with their bodies, but ours continue on. Now, this extends to plants and any living thing, by the way. It's not just animals. Anything that lives, this is what they say. But personally, I don't believe it. I believe that we all share the same breath of life, or soul, or whatever you want to call it, but we share it to different degrees, and I think, it all depends on the vessel. Different bodies are like different vessels, and I really think that how far along our soul is, basically we get the vessel that's perfectly matched for how far along our soul is. And so a different vessel can hold, a different amount or a different degree of this breath of life. Maybe an animal vessel can't hold as much of this energy as a human vessel. But I believe once the vessel dies, that same energy is still going to go back to its same origins. If heaven is the origin, then that's where, this energy or the soul comes from, if you want to call it that, then that is where the energy is going to return to, or, provided it doesn't get trapped elsewhere, and that's a whole other, can of worms. But I think that once we're in our vessel, once our soul is in our vessel, and we speak about this in lots of different paranormal terms, especially possession, but once the soul is in our vessel, I think that the actions we take tune our soul. Like good actions, can cause our soul to vibrate at a higher frequency, and negative actions can cause our soul to vibrate at a lower frequency. And I get this from, all these different people who people have had past life experiences, have allegedly spoke to God and stuff like that. But, they say that, demons, for example, are on a lower vibrational frequency.
And I mean, let's face it, almost every, spiritual school teaches something along those lines. You have, those from the upper planes and those from the lower planes, and we're kind of in the middle, which would indicate some kind of neutrality. And I mean, we are talking about energy. I mean, if we're going to subsume that the soul does exist, then I'm sure we can all come to agree that it's some sort of energy. And I mean, it would make sense that it would follow some sort of law of energetics. Where like attracts like, and I mean, in some cases, magnetics, you have opposites attracting and likes repelling. But if you liken it to some kind of charge, I guess, going back to it's kind of like electricity going back to ground. Electricity always tries to go back to where it came from. So when your device shorts out and the electricity goes to the ground wire, it travels out through a copper wire and into a rod or a plate that's been buried or driven into the ground. And it tries to, get back to ground. And it just kind of, would make sense that the energy that comprises the soul would try to go back home, go back to ground. I mean, it's right there in our in our face, even though we can't necessarily detect it on that level yet.
And one of the things that I pondered about when I thought about this was that, like, okay, so like they've said that, like, you got these different places. So if you want to keep it simple, you can say you got heaven, which is a high vibrational place. You got hell, which is a low vibrational place, and you have earth, which is like a middle, somewhere in the middle, right? And truthfully, I believe that there's many shades in every direction. I don't believe there's three spots. I believe there's many, many shades up, many, many shades down, and in the middle. It's just one big gradient. But when it comes to say demons, which they believe are a lower vibrational, their spirits is on a lower vibrational frequency. I mean, hasn't it occurred to anybody that in order to be here, it seems that they need to possess somebody. They need to take our vessel to exist here because their bodies can't exist here. That's what it seems like. It's like they want to be here. They want to be at a higher vibrational frequency place than they're to currently, but they can't because their bodies cannot exist here, so they possess us. They take our vessel from us. That's what it seems like in all these different cases. I mean, why else would they do it? Aside from the obvious reason that they get enjoyment out of it, but it does seem like they want to be here. I mean, they go through, the exorcisms. They fight tooth and nail to stay here. They do anything to stay here. So,
and that's a common theme in a lot of different kinds of spiritual camps. Really, spirits, don't have a body where they come from, so they need ours to exist here. And they covet that. That's a common theme that runs throughout. Even in some lore, it's not even necessarily evil spirits, but they need to get something done, so they have to take a human body. Yeah,
It almost seems like the only way to advance your soul at all is to have a vessel, and maybe it's only here that you can get a vessel. Everywhere else probably is spiritual. Right, but I mean, we've had the same kind of discussion with other entities. I mean, when we did that one with Brenton about that Daryl, right? I mean, he was talking about these interdimensional beings, and they seem to only be able to exist here for a certain amount of time. They weren't from this place, and perhaps they can come here and they can interact with us for a certain amount of time using technology. But they still can't stay, right? I mean, there's something, again, I think it all comes back to the vibrational frequency. They can't stay here. They can't exist here. It's just like we can go underwater, but, we have to use our technology to go under there and breathe. And even then, we can only stay under there so long. We eventually have to come back, right?
Well, I mean, we know that the universe has a frequency. Everything in our universe pretty much flashes on and off at the same regular interval, whatever many, billion milliseconds or whatever it's measured in. So there is a whole frequency to the reality that we live in, that everything from here blinks at that rate. So, I mean, if you're not lined up, if you're not blinking on and off with the reality around you, unless you have some, like you said, some technological means to, maybe make the local area more comfortable for you. Perhaps that's why people report all kinds of distortions of space and time. It seemed like it was forever, but it was only a few minutes. In Brenton's story, the doorway was, it was whatever he said, 20 feet away, but it was only like a 9x9 room or something.
Yeah.
So you get this distortion of reality, perhaps because, like you said, they're not blinking on and off along with us. It's going to be difficult for for whatever passes for biology in their body to to do what it needs to do if it's not in sync with the rest of the universe. So I guess you're talking an artificial, creating an artificial pocket, within our universe. And I mean, that goes off into all kinds of other areas, like you said, but it's an interesting, an interesting thought experiment. This idea of vibration. So I mean, we see it, we see it. It exists. We can record it, measure it. It's real. And so, what does that mean for the eternal spirit?
Well, yeah, and like if we bring this back to the case of animals, because like we were saying, I mean, we could take this, right down to interdimensional beings. I mean, we can take the ideology, but if we scale it right back to our own planet, and again, we're looking at animals, and of course, we're comparing the vessel, right? So again, I really think that the vessel that we're given closely matches how far along our spirit is, right? I mean, it only makes sense that how complex our spirit would be equally matched to the vessel so that we can further progress, right? So maybe some of these animals, like cats and dogs, they're just not as far along yet as we are, because there's this idea, right? And I mean, we got a little bit of this from when we talked to Howard Storm, and I've done lots of research on, people who've had near-death experiences and stuff, and, a lot of people believe that, once we die, we go on to the hereafter and that's it, right? And that's just too easy for me.
It sounds a little too simple, straightforward.
Yeah.
Nothing in life works like that. Why would death work like that?
Yeah, and like we have, like, in terms of, people who have had past life experiences. I mean, there's been children that, at the age of 4 have told their parents, like, I remember my last life, this was my name, here's where I worked, here's where I lived. And, it was so curious and that a 4-year-old could know this stuff that the parents actually went and researched it and found out that, it was true for somebody with that name had lived that life and he died or got shot. And it's scary because then they're thinking, like, this is their kid is the reincarnation of this person, right? I mean, there's quite a few different stories that you find like that.
There was even a case of a kid doing something similar, and he walked up to his murderer with a group of people there and said, I remember you killed me with a rock, and you buried me under in your yard or something like that, and the guy broke down and confessed, and when they dug in the certain spot in the guy's yard, lo and behold, they found somebody who had been missing for a year or more, something like that. So you have these very strong cases for reincarnation. They do exist out there. I mean, that's pretty. I mean, how in the hell would this kid who wasn't even, he was born, but let's face it, it was, a year or more, and he was, just like 5 or 6 or something,
Yeah.
It just boggles the mind. Where does that information come from?
And of course, if you look at, Greek mythology, they would say that the new souls and stuff like that, they would have to drink from a river called Lethe River, which would give them amnesia to their past life before they were, brought out again. So and like this is and if I got that wrong, by the way, there's plenty of other mixed matched stuff out there. But that's the idea, is that when you come here, you have past life amnesia. And in a couple of rare cases, such as these children, they can actually remember. The whole idea being that if we need to be kind of ignorant in order to like learn, like we're not supposed to retain what we got in our past life, because it's supposed to be a whole new learning experience. And many people have said when they died, or when they had their near-death experience, that is like as soon as they die, is like all this information comes flooding back. It's like they remembered, as almost like the life they were living was a dream, and it's like they only woke up when they died. It's like all the stuff came back. All of a sudden, they remembered who they were, their identity, everything before this life. So, going with that train of thought, that we actually come back here, it seems like the idea being that every time we live, we're trying to progress, trying to grow our soul, to ascend again, so that we can go further up in the ascension. Like we can get to the next tier in heaven, or I don't think it's heaven necessarily. Like I said, I think it's a lot of gray areas. But like in the terms of a cat soul or a dog soul, perhaps if they can live their life and progress enough, in their next life they'll go to the next animal up. and after that life they'll go to the next animal up until eventually, they get a human vessel, right? And perhaps maybe a human vessel is the absolute greatest vessel here on Earth. Maybe that's why we consider ourselves the most intelligent, is because on Earth we probably are. But what about other planets? All through.
And I couldn't help but think of Howard Storm and some of the stuff that he said to us. I know it was interesting because even after we finished the episode, we talked to him for like another half an hour or more, and I can't remember if this was part of the recorded conversation that we had, because really we had 3 almost separate conversations with the guy. And he had so much information. But I believe one of the points that he made was that, it's rare for a person to actually reincarnate as a human. Like, you really got to mess up to reincarnate back as a human, that there are so many other forms and things and lessons and places to learn that, I guess it's safe to say it was his opinion on the matter, that, if you were reincarnating, you were doing it as a new creature. And, I would very much like to think that, our animal friends, and, we spend a lot of time talking about the pets, but I guess it would apply to, pretty much everything, because you see this kind of you see that empathy everywhere in almost every species, and it's interesting to think that each time they come back, that animating force comes back. It's in something new, in a little different, maybe a little more complex, a little further up the line, a little more social.
Yeah, and I think the idea that, perhaps if we live this life right, we might graduate from the human vessel, and the next time we could be on another planet, and it'll be a step up from the human vessel, but we could be the equivalent of an insect on the next planet, right? So, and then we'll do that whole chain again, and we'll continue to go from place to place, from body to body, until our soul it has improved enough that we can finally reach the throne of God, or whatever you want to call it, that mass consciousness of being, that mass creative force. And
I really like the way Howard put it. When you're done, when you finally get it, you get to actually participate in creation.
Yeah, and actually is interesting. Like, I read this. There was a near-death experience I read once. It was this woman. She had, actually she was more like a teenager. She had gotten into a car accident. I think she was 17, and she was floating around the sky, and she remembers seeing this energy going everywhere, and it was almost like there was a whirlpool in the sky where all this energy was going, and she got this understanding of how everything worked, and it was that all this energy was going back together, like it's all part of the same thing. So the idea being that once all this energy comes back together, like when you have the human soul, the animal soul, is all the same energy, probably different amounts, different memory, just as your body has, a lot of different cells, right? I mean, they're all still individual, they have their own makeup, but you have many of it, right? And together in a system, it works to do, something greater than the sum of its parts. And so maybe, once you become one again with this creative energy, once your spirit has upgraded enough that you can go back, and become one with this great I can't pronounce it.
Omnipotent.
Omnipotent. Yes, this energy that's everywhere all at once. Perhaps that is the end goal, is to be everywhere at once, to know everything, to see everything, to hear everything, to feel everything, to know everything, ultimately to be everything, right? That is the ultimate creative energy. And that is our goal, is to become one with that once again. And so when we look at all these split up vessels, whether it be animal, human, insect, even if you want to go that. I mean, the Indians even had it down to the the grass, the trees. I mean, everything that lives, anything that can die, right? I mean, once all this energy goes back to what it, where it's meant to be, I think that might be the end goal, right? So, I don't necessarily believe that, once we die, we're going to meet up at the pearly gates and we'll see our animals again. Maybe there is some kind of thing like that, but I don't think that is like the end game. Do you know what I mean? Maybe we don't even get to see our pets once we get to the pearly gates, because we need to wait for them to catch up to where we are, because we're a little bit ahead, right? But maybe in another form of life, in a different vessel, we will meet up again. Maybe some of us will fail and we'll be held back a grade. You know what I mean? Like, and some way we'll catch up, and in the next life, our cat will be human too, or our dog will be human too. And they've said that different souls have a tendency to
migrate together.
Yes, so like people who are your family or your friends in one life could very well be involved in your next life in a similar fashion, if not directly related, but some way. Maybe it's your friend this time, maybe it's your animal, maybe, like in some way, but there's always this familiarity because, again, like similar souls migrate together, right? So that, my ultimate thought on the whole thing, I guess, is that animals are really no different than us. It's just a matter of how far along they are on the spiritual scale. Just like we have evolutionary scale, I think that the spiritual scale would also apply. And I just think that the vessel is equivalent to how far along they are. So, is there an afterlife for, animals? And I definitely think so. I just think that it's more than just you die and you're in a place called heaven or hell.
Well, I mean, how often in nature is anything just thrown away and not reused in some way? It's never. And I mean, for me, I can't help but think of the afterlife in terms of, the natural world that's around me. I mean, everything in our entire universe seems to cycle around in circles and recycle itself, and the material and the energy, everything gets used. I mean, we're made of bits and pieces of stardust, if the the astronomers are to be believed. And I mean, it just goes to show that everything in this natural world is recycled and reused. Nothing's ever destroyed and just tossed aside and discarded. Why would the animating force of an animal be any different? I mean, it makes perfect sense for it to rejoin that energy matrix in whatever capacity.
Exactly. So I mean, the case of God and life and all those different questions. I mean, maybe it's just there was this life force and always was, right? There was this matter. It just always was, and we always think in cycles, and we can't wrap our head around the idea that something without a cycle, it just is. But maybe that is what it is. It just is. We can't grasp it in our current bodies or a vessel. We can ponder about it, but we just don't have the means to grasp it.
So the three universal constants would have been matter, energy, and consciousness.
Yeah.
That's an interesting concept.
So ultimately, that's my thought on it. Of course, it'll be interesting to hear from you pet lovers out there what you think, and no doubt some of you religious fanatics are gonna have a field day with some of this stuff. But anyway, I do hope that you enjoyed it and you catch us next time. And of course, if you have any effed up stories of your own, we'd like to hear it. So again, you can visit our website at www.effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. And with that said, this is Will signing out.
And this is Ryan. Good night, everybody.